Tonight, national pressure points meet public mood. And from rising economic uncertainty to mental fatigue, a potential postal strike.
And the country watching playoff hockey for escape? We've got it all covered from Montreal and 4 floors up as usual from you-know-who. I'm Eddie Tekalik.
And I'm Gary MacDonald, and this is Night Talk episode 34. Before we get started, we welcome your comments. Be part of the conversation by posting down below. We will feature and respond to as many as possible. Now, let's dive into the money, the mail, and the mental strain facing Canadians today. First off, for segment 1, we have an audience question, and that is, was the Carney government's budget reversal a smart pivot or a sign of poor planning? Well, following the first meeting of Prime Minister Mark Carney's new cabinet last week, Finance Minister François-Philippe Champagne announced his government would not be tabling a budget, opting for the annual fall economic statement instead. That was met with surprise and criticism. Among those not impressed was, you'd never guess who, but Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre.
We were very disappointed yesterday to hear that he has no budget planned for this year. This makes it the longest period without a budget since the 60s, the first time there has not been a budget outside of COVID in over 20 years. Extremely unusual. It'll send a bad signal to investors and ratings agencies, and a lot of people will wonder what the Liberal government is hiding about our finances.
Well, on the weekend, during his visit to Rome, Prime Minister Carney dismissed the idea of a fall economic statement. His government will table a budget this fall.
There'll be a budget in the fall. In the short term, it's a very short parliamentary session that is coming up. The speech from the throne is on the 27th, as people know. The House is due to rise under the House's rules by the 20th of June, so it's really 3 weeks. We have some very clear priorities, which, as you know, from following those who followed the campaign, those who followed my remarks, those who followed my opening press, include
Well, the bottom line of it is that the Prime Minister, and I apologize for that because, I don't know, it worked perfectly this afternoon. Oh.
To help create
Okay. I apologize for that. It is Yeah, not good. I'm not sure what happened because I've been playing it all day. Maybe I wore them out. Who knows? Anyway, bottom line is the Prime Minister said there are things that have to fall into place. He wants to do it, and he's using his experience as an international banker. He wants to do it and do it right. And there are some things that have to fall into place, like the NATO meeting that's coming up, and what kind of commitments will be coming out of that over and above maybe what they've been looking for all along. There's talk of upping it from 2 to 3% of the GDP to I think it's up to maybe as high as 5%. So there's a discussion around that. There's still a lot of other questions about our friends south of the border and tariffs and the impact on the economy, which we're starting to feel that as well. So he wants to make sure that he has everything together, and that when they present the budget, he says it will be a solid document for Canadians, and outlining the plan that Pierre Poilievre was talking about last week. Eddie, your thoughts?
Well, you know what? When you and I chatted earlier in the week, and you had mentioned that Prime Minister Carney, at the end of the day, did decide now to table a budget. My initial reaction was, Mr. Carney, you're making myself and Gary look bad. Just last week, we were saying, what's the rush, this, that, and the other thing, and then all of a sudden you come out and you say a budget is going to be tabled. At that particular point in time, I didn't know that it was actually going to be tabled in the fall. So I kind of backtrack on my thoughts a little, Gary, and in terms of some of the strong statements that Prime Minister Carney made, that there was not too much value in rushing a budget at the earliest opportunity, which is something that you and I discussed on the show last week. You know what? When you're saying he's using his experience as a financial expert, what's the rush? Let's get this thing done right the first time. Let's do these things right, and then we move forward. So. Myself, you know what? I mean, Pierre Poilievre, it's his job to be a critique and criticize anything that comes out of the party that's in charge of the country, being the Liberals. So it's his job to voice his concerns. Are they valid concerns? Do they represent concerns for citizens of Canada? Is it really going to kill them if they wait another 3 months? Probably not. I doubt that very much. On organizations worldwide in terms of determining our financial feasibility here as a country, our economy. 3 months, probably not. So you know what? I'm all behind Prime Minister Carney taking his time and coming out and directly putting his commitment down that he will be tabling a budget come fall. You know what? There might have been some sort of a miscommunication between himself and Finance Minister Champagne, or they had another discussion in saying, "Look, let's do what we need to do over the next 3 months, pencil to paper, and let's put something on the table come the fall." So, you know what? Yeah, we're about 415 days since the last budget was tabled. Okay, you know what? A couple more months is not going to kill anybody. Let's get this right, Gary, is my opinion, because it's just so damn important that we get things right. And don't forget, too, things are changing, not on a monthly basis here in the world and North America. Things are changing daily, depending what the Trumpster has to say down south. So, you know what? Let's take our time. Let's get our ducks in a row. Let's make sure we're making the right calls and move forward from the fall tabling.
Well, there are a couple of issues that Carney seems to be having right off the bat. And there are a lot of people who are trying to give them the benefit of the doubt as far as, the new government, new cabinet, Carney's new to politics. But the issue here is you had Champagne coming out of the first cabinet meeting of the new cabinet and talking about a fall economic statement only, not a budget. And Was that what was discussed around the cabinet table? Was that the message that was sent out? Was it sent out maybe as a trial balloon, as Liberals and other governments from time to time are so good at doing? Let's float this idea, and if we get hit with snowballs, then let's roll back, and we can just say, well, this was something we were thinking about, but nothing was cast in stone. This is what's going to happen. It's hard to say, but. Yeah. Then you had Gregor Robertson, the housing minister, coming out and kind of going off the page as well. And the other one, Guibo.
That was a bad one.
Yeah, that was a really bad one coming off. So either Carney has to really tighten up. He wants to give, from the way he's talking, he wants to give these ministers the opportunity to go do their jobs without micromanagement. But by the same token, already you've got some issues with that, and you have to just pull them all in and have a little session as to, okay, here are the messages. These are the messages you will be going out with now, and that's your key message. Here are the talking points to support your key message, and that's all you say. Walk away. So we're into the first month, but you know what? Carney has to get a hold of these guys and gals and just get things tightened up a bit more and move forward. The bottom line is, it's going to be interesting to watch his budget when it comes down in the fall, and hopefully it's going to come sooner rather than later in the session, because when you think about it, we didn't, the fall statement was tabled last December in amongst the chaos that Freeland created when she handed in her resignation before tabling the economic statement, right, and then refusing to do it. And they just kind of brought it in and distributed it in the House, and that was pretty much it. And just before Christmas, so it didn't really get a going over. And then, early in the new year, Trudeau had his come to Jesus moment and comes out and announces his resignation. So at that point, there we are, a government that's kind of, it was lost before and floating, and even more lost and floating that day in January when Trudeau did us all a favor and stepped down on his own. So I'm willing, Carney made a good argument the way he presented it. And you know what? I think it was that good. Let's just give it one more try, because I think we should hear it from him rather than me trying to sum it up.
There'll be a budget in the fall. In the short term, it's a very short parliamentary session that is coming up. The speech from the throne is on the 27th, as people know. The House is due to rise under the House's rules by the 20th of June, so it's really 3 weeks. We have some very clear priorities, which, as you know, from following those who followed the campaign, those who followed my remarks, those who followed my opening press conference, would include the federal government taking all the steps it can to help create one Canadian economy out of 13, in addition, initiatives such as the middle class tax cut. But there will be a budget in the fall.
Abigail Beeman, CTV News.
Yep.
To that point, with your economic experience as a former governor of two central banks, why not present Canadians with a budget at the very first opportunity?
Well, this is in fact based on my economic experience. There is not much value in my judgment, and it's considered judgment, and it's judgment based on experience, that there is not much value in trying to rush through a budget in a very narrow window, 3 weeks, with a new cabinet.
Okay, so for whatever reason, the audio seems to have just gone haywire on us. So, but at least you got a little bit more of what he said compared to the first time we played it, and I loved the background. Loved that background. It was just, whew. Especially after a day like today when it was so cold here. Anyhow, So really, Carney has a job ahead of him budget-wise, and also when we are talking about controlling the ministers and the messaging that they're coming out of cabinet with. Growing pains, hopefully, and hopefully those growing pains will be addressed within the next 2 to 3 weeks, which will save Carney a lot of grief in the long run. So
we're talking about I mean, basically, Gary, what we're talking about is a honeymoon period. I mean, always, whenever there's a change of government, there's always a little bit of a honeymoon period, right? But the fact of the matter is, Gary, in reality, based on everything that's going on in the world right now, the Trump circus, the tariffs, and everything else at this particular stage, you know what? He unfortunately doesn't have the luxury of an extended honeymoon, even though he's getting his feet wet in the political sphere. So, you know what? A couple of minor things where he's got to get his people back on the same page with him, make sure to communicate adequately and correctly with the public, and let's move on and conduct the business of Canada. I don't think he's got a lot of time to do that in. I think he's made the right call in not rushing to table a budget just to appease the Pierre Poilievres of the world. That he's promised he's going to put one out come the fall. He will put it out, and he's got a lot of priorities he's got to deal with right off the bat during his honeymoon. Look, you and I have talked about this extensively, and I believe Prime Minister Carney as well. A priority for this government is getting rid of those interprovincial trade barriers. That is the priority, Mr. Poilievre and anybody else in the House of Commons. That is a priority for Canada at this particular stage, while we continue with our relationship building economically with the other economies of the world besides the United States of America. And that's what the priority should be. And you know what? Stay tuned. The budget is going to come out in the fall. And by the way, you're probably, Mr. Poilievre or anybody else, not going to be happy with that budget anyway. So stay tuned. We'll listen to the complaints, but stay the course, Mr. Prime Minister Carney. This is what Eddie has to say.
all right, Eddie, that's a good way of wrapping it up. And we'll move on to our next topic here in a moment. But coming up, postal strains. First, a reminder, if you are looking for a Canadian web hosting service, check out Web Hosting Canada. That's WHC, a Montreal-based company offering everything from basic web hosting to domain sales and management to high-level corporate needs. WHC provides domain and email services for Night Talk. You can check out the affiliate link below. All right, postal pressure, strikes, service, straying. First off, let's start off with the question, should the federal government intervene early in postal labor disputes or let them play out? So that's the question. If you have any thoughts on that, by all means, add it to the comments. So late last week, the Postal Workers Union served notice it would be back on the picket lines by Friday of this week if no progress was made in contract talks. Meantime, details of a recent report on the future of Canada Post, commissioned in December of last year, were released. And it's not a pretty picture financially and comes with a number of recommendations. And those recommendations include updating Canadian Postal Service Charter, including service standards for delivery, frequency, and post office requirements, update process for calculating and setting letter mail price increases, lift moratorium on rural post office closures with a new approach to protect rural service. That's a tough one. How do you protect rural service when you're closing the post offices out there? And moratorium on community mailbox conversions. Well, that says conversations. That should be conversions. Implement more flexible staffing models. That's a tough one with the union. And revision of employee leave, pension, retirement benefits to contain costs while maintaining Canada Post as an employer of choice. Now, this morning, Canada Post tabled a new offer to the union. The union has spent the afternoon reviewing the offer. The problem being the union has been saying all along that it would need more than 24 hours or 36 hours to review to make sure all of the T's were crossed and the I's dotted, and all of the legalese have, the lawyers have a look at the document as well. And it does take time, and, I get where they're coming from. So they're set to go out on strike at midnight Friday. And this is a continuation, if you will recall, of the strike back just before Christmas when the federal government stepped in, got everyone back to work to get in the last week or so before Christmas, at least some of the Christmas mail out and parcels delivered. And also struck the commission to look into the fate of Canada Post, and that's what we have now with the, some of these recommendations. But here we are, we're back into the same sort of scenario we were in before. So I don't know there's much hope of avoiding a strike before Friday. And really, when you think about it, each time the union goes out on strike, it's like they're chopping off another finger, because it's pushing more and more people to look at alternative means for delivery. And frankly, anything that we have delivered now is either coming by Telecom courier, I should say, FedEx, Pure Later, which is owned by Canada Post. And there's another one, what is it, DHS, I think, and a couple of biggies like that. So, I don't know, is there really a future for Canada Post as we now know it? And, the union says, oh yeah, we're ready to look at some ways of modernizing things, but, maybe if they find a compromise as far as the letter carrier, okay, maybe don't eliminate home delivery altogether, but maybe deliver 3 times a week or twice a week.
Yeah. You know what I mean? This whole, the thing that struck me first is, canceling home delivery. We're at a point today in our society that, there's a lot of individuals that probably never written a letter in their life and, licked a stamp and put it on an envelope and sent it in the mail. Okay. But there are a lot of individuals out there that are completely dependent on home delivery or to the local community boxes, especially our elderly. I mean, our population is aging. They depend on regular mail delivery. Just outright not doing so, I don't think would be of any value to our seniors. I think that's completely unfair. Are there opportunities with union concessions to be able to come up with some kind of a solution? Geez, Gary, I really don't know. I mean, I've been trying to look at some of the numbers related to Canada Post being a feasible Crown Corporation business organization. And man, it doesn't look good. I mean, look, they're competing with the big ones. I mean, we mentioned the DHLs and the FedExes of the world and whatnot. Just on parcel, I mean, they don't have an outright coast-to-coast mandate or a monopoly, if you want to call it, for parcel services in Canada. In 2019, Canada Post came out and said that they basically delivered 62% of the packages across the country, right? And just within a mere 4 or 5 years, that's dropped down to just 29%. All right. So, I mean, from a business perspective, you got to take a look at your overheads in terms of the labor forces required to deliver all of this. They're substantially less. I mean, and I think right now the union for the Canadian postal workers have 55,000 members. At some point, whether Canada Post was a private organization or a Crown Corporation, at some point, business acumen 101's got to kick in. And you have to have those discussions with the unions to say, look, we cannot work this way. I think the Canadian government even subsidized them and spotted them $1 billion at the beginning of the year just to operate. They're going to be asking for more money. So you can't pull the plug because it's the only show in town for mail delivery or small parcel delivery. Canada Post has got a monopoly on that. There is nowhere else to go to unless you invest in private organization, spend a lot of money to deliver a piece of mail, which doesn't make any sense. So what's the answer, Gary? I really don't know. This is a real tough one. And and by the way, back in December when the Labor Minister ordered Canada Post employees back on duty, that was basically to give it another 5-6 months so they can actually negotiate. Well, obviously they didn't negotiate very much. Number one, and number two, considering the show that was put on with Trudeau's resignation, the Liberal leadership, the election, I am sure that the priorities for the government were not Canada Post at that particular time, and they let it slide. So we are where we are right now. We don't have an alternate solution. So somebody's got to budge and compromise and allow the organization to at least exist for the next 6 months until Prime Minister Carney can figure out what that solution for mail delivery is going to be in Canada. Because right now, there doesn't seem to be anything else besides Canada Post. And who's going to blink first is going to be the question, I think.
Oh, no doubt about that, Eddie. And it seems that the internet trolls are still with us. We lost service in Quebec and Ontario, and I understand a couple of areas of Atlantic Canada earlier today through Bell. And Videotron seems to be acting up, and we're getting some freeze ups and breakups a bit. So stick with us, folks. We'll tough it through. As long as we have some kind of a connection, you're not going to get rid of us that easily. All right, coming up next, we have Trump, tariffs, inflation, among the things causing more Canadians to suffer from mental fatigue. We're going to speak with a mental health expert. Well, moving day isn't that far away, and if you are looking for a new internet provider, I can recommend eBox. They offer fiber with competitively priced plans. You can check out an affiliate link with a special coupon code in the description below. All right, let's keep rolling along here because we do have some important business to discuss. And I think we've all been feeling this from time to time. And that is, the past 5 years have been overwhelming for most people. The impact of COVID and lockdowns, then tensions flaring on the international scene. With the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, the October 7th attack on Israel, followed by a divisive U.S. election campaign, our own federal leadership woes, a government in crisis because of leadership or lack thereof, the inauguration of Donald Trump as U.S. president, his tariffs and trade wars, inflation out of control, market crashes, job uncertainty. What is this doing to the mental health of Canadians? Well, Greg Zed has spent a lifetime in the field of mental health and addictions and is a forensic suicidologist. Greg joins us now from his home in Rothsay, New Brunswick. And Greg, thank you for being with us here this evening. Looking forward to a good discussion on this whole issue, because I know even I have been, in the last couple of weekends at least, trying to, shall we say, de-Trump, de-tariff, by just trying to ignore the whole thing and trying to regain what little bit of sanity I've ever had. So is it really, are you sensing that it's becoming a real issue, this whole fatigue thing and what we've been going through for the last 18 to 24 months?
Yes, well, thank you very much for inviting me on the show. And I would have to agree that your intro certainly laid out for your audience the fact that there is a fair amount of negativity in the world and around us. And I think I'd rather look at the glass half full than half empty in the aspect of it insofar as what can we do as human beings to combat it. You mentioned earlier about I'm in my 51st year working in the addiction and mental health field, and including reviewing for well over 2 or 3 decades suicides within our province, causation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I will say this, that we are seeing an increase in what we would refer to as people that are somewhat depressed and anxious. Doctors, for example, are saying 80% of their practice now is seeing people that are depressed and anxious. What we haven't really seen yet, which is kind of interesting and it will take time, is we haven't seen a negative consequence to that insofar as it hasn't had a dramatic increase in suicide rates, for example. That would be, if you want, the worst case scenario. But what we do have is we have an increase in youth mental health, and schools are trying to get a handle on that. And we're having also an increase in depression, anxiety, and the Canadian Chamber of Commerce will report also the fact of absenteeism and people using sick time. So it's certainly playing on the Canadian economy, and for lack of a better phrase, the outcomes are there is an increase.
Greg, what should we be looking for as far as any kind of signs that either personally we're having a tough time dealing with something, or somebody very close to us is having a tough time dealing with everything that's going on? They're overwhelmed.
Well, certainly listening to them and having an empathetic ear is very important, and show concern. And people will, if given that opportunity, will share with individuals such as friends, their clergy, their neighbors about that hard time. And I think when that is explored, then you can get into, without getting too clinical here, you can get into, well, how bad is it? What's been going on? And really trying to get a measurement of how bad it is. And then and only then can you take a look at where next should you refer the person, whether it be to their family doctor, or a family friend, or their local mental health clinic, et cetera, et cetera. What I would guard against is we don't want to medicalize everything that is wrong with the world. And there is that possibility that everyone's depressed, everyone's suffering from anxiety and depression, and we'll just literally and figuratively fill up hospital ERs. And that's not what we want. What we really want is community-based interventions that can help us all control the controllables. So therefore, it's always good to get groups together, say, for example, in your building or in a local community, to talk about what are the ways we can manage stress, for example. Managing stress would be at least the beginning of what do we know about stress, what can we do as human beings to deal with stress, and what are the outcomes that we can measure, if you want, in terms of, am I doing it effectively?
Now, is it hitting any particular age group harder than others? Like, I know you mentioned the youth, and as you're growing up, you're going through a lot of pressures from the outside, and now they have to deal with all of the pressures of social media as well. But even on the other end, there are adults who get fully involved in the world of social media, and that has to pile on the negativity that is there every day, has to pile on as well. But is it across all age groups, or are there a couple of age groups in particular where
It's
you're
actually
seeing it?
a third of each of the categories. There's no question that youth are having an increase in, let's just say, mental health issues. But many of them are managed quite well by organizations like the Canadian Mental Health Association that have coping mechanisms, whether it be in the school system or guidance counselors or things like that. So that is one layer. The other area is, of course, again, staying away from medicalizing everything. It's not that we have an increase in mental illness across. Like, for instance, I'm heavily involved with the Schizophrenia Society of Canada. And I know, and I don't speak for them tonight, but I would say this: COVID has certainly seen people that are vulnerable fall further and further behind. People with poor economic means, we see the homeless, which I've never witnessed in my practice. I have never, when I worked with the health authority here in St. John and the greater St. John area, and then in the Sussex area, I've never seen a tent or a sleeping bag in terms of a social housing crisis. We had affordable housing, and we had rent control to a certain extent, and we would have people that would get a subsidy from the Department of Social Development, and they would get an apartment for, I would say, $400 or $500, and the formula was they would pay 30% of their maximum gross income. Today, the average rent, when you're talking $1,200, $1,400, $1,500, it's no wonder we have so much homeless people. Now, that doesn't translate necessarily to a mental illness, but it is a determinant of health, and not having stable housing is, over the long run, going to impact the mental health and well-being of individuals. That's one example. But getting back to the approach, it's got to be control the controllables. So getting the group together, if you want to make sure that you're doing everything to possibly work at having proper sleep, proper recreation, proper nutrition. And only after you get those things under control can you look forward with other ways and means of dealing with the stressor at hand, including shutting off social media.
Yeah, and Greg, that's actually a big one. I've actually tried that, where both my wife and I have had enough of. I mean, a lot of the chaos that's happening in the United States. We literally shut off the television for a good year. We did not listen to the news. We did not pay attention to social media streams online, because both Manel and I found that was really impacting our own mental health. And no matter what we try to do to filter through some of the craziness that was actually being thrown at us by mainstream media and social media platforms, we just couldn't filter it out anymore. So we literally had to shut it off. So, Greg, what can you say to our viewers? On top of the three items you just mentioned that are on the forefront of getting your health back together before tackling the mental health issues and the stressors that we're seeing on social media. Sometimes it's just very difficult to turn it off. It's almost like a moth going into the fire in a lot of cases, because A, it's informative, B, it's entertaining, and C, at the same time, it ends up being very stressful. What can you recommend to our viewers on how to cope with that? Because it's very tough just to shut everything off. Not everybody's like my wife and I. Some people are drawn to it. What do you suggest they do to minimize the amount of stress that they take to bed with them?
Well, I would say right off the bat, the first thing that they have to do is they have to control the controllables. And I don't think many of us really want to. What you want to do is we don't want to think that we can control the controllables. For example, having effective and sleep. If you're not sleeping properly, that really runs against all principles of stress management because it's very much related to heart disease. So, for example, if someone's not sleeping, they could have a sleep disorder. They have to get that underway. The second thing, of course, is the proper nutrition. And we could easily say, well, in today's economic world, it's hard to buy healthy food. But
Right.
if you plan your meals and try to get your proper nutrition and realize that food and nutrition does play a significant role, that is, again, you can control what goes in your mouth and not feed off of tendencies to grab onto chips and junk food and things of that nature, because we do know that that does affect your mental health and well-being.
Mm-hmm.
A third one, which people tend to neglect for whatever reason, is recreation. I mean, walking is so effective in controlling one's mental health and well-being. Research galore, and not that I lean on academic research all the time, but it's demonstrated long and hard and longitudinal studies that walking as much as 20 minutes a day is very, very effective. So that there is three things. The other thing that I think we have to be careful about is being drawn into negativity. And
Yeah.
you often hear about toxicity. Why hang on to it? If you're in a toxic relationship, easier said than done, but toxicity has no role to play in our well-being. And so therefore, if you control the controllables, you have to more or less get away from any toxic negativity that'll just drag you down psychologically.
Yeah.
So there's four things right off the bat. The fifth one that comes up from time to time is to be aware of your genetics. And, we can't control genetics, but we can know about it. So make sure you have a health care plan with your physician and, get proper, I'm not saying you should run like lots of people and automatically get blood work and whatever. But that whole notion of preventative care and looking after ourselves, and dare I say, at both Gary, you and Eddie's age, I would hope that you'd look after your health because it's the only thing you have. Because without health, you have no mental health, or
Mm-hmm.
vice versa. Without mental health, you have no health.
Yeah, thank you for that, Greg. You know what? It makes a lot of sense. I'll be the first to admit that sometimes I'll get depressed about this, that, or the other thing, and kind of drag it on for a couple of days, and maybe I'll give Gary a call and talk some of the things out, which does help. But you know what? I'm guilty of one thing you just said. Physical health before mental health, and you know what? I very often put it on the back burner, and you're probably right. That probably contributes to my to the status of my mental health. So I really appreciate that suggestion and comment, Greg. Very informative.
Well, the Coalition for Mental Illness and Health has been advocating with the federal government now as long as I can remember. I think at least the last 8 or 10 years. Certainly parity. And interestingly enough, not to sound the alarm about mental health, but when we look at budgeting, mental health is always as they say, and I don't want to get into this poor cousin syndrome, but it's not financed and it's not funded at the same level as physical health. And it's not as sexy. And so therefore, other, very, very serious illnesses like cancer, for example, heart disease, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, certainly often take the lion's share of a budget. And I would hope, for example, the federal government, the new government, even though they didn't go back to a minister for mental health, that the health minister has enough people to influence around things like advocacy to access to good, proper mental health.
Let's see.
Greg, you mentioned earlier about the fact that the number of suicides, there's been no appreciable increase as we go through this period that we're going through. What would be some of the signs that we should be watching for in a family member or a close friend, as far as looking at, are they, ready to take that turn down that dark road? What should we be looking for? And once we identify it, how do we handle it?
Well, it's not an easy one, but I'll say this, that in the suicides that I've reviewed, every individual who is suicided has left a cue or a clue or whatever. And the guilt is with all of us where we miss something. How do we miss it? So obviously, if someone is feeling bad, you might want to gauge that. How bad is it? Have you ever wanted to kill yourself? And to a great extent, nationally, we have a program which is referred to as the Assist Workshop, which is applied suicide intervention skills training. And it's in every community across, actually not only across Canada, it's international. And people are trained in doing that. And we're talking lay people to do an intervention. And that will intervene for that moment in time. And if you can think of it like someone drowning in a river and you do the intervention and get them to shore, then the ambulance comes. And then after the ambulance comes, they get to the ER. And then after that, they get into mental health. And that would be the first thing. So certainly take them seriously, talk to them in a non-judgmental way. And when I say non-judgmental, if you're feeling that they're quite serious and they want to kill themselves, ask them, come out and ask them. And I've never met anyone in the 51 years that I've been involved that if you ever ask someone, how bad is it? And have you ever thought of suicide? They actually will feel relieved that someone has taken them serious enough to ask that question. And then from there, it's a matter of getting the appropriate help at the intervention. And that is why I say the parity is important, because we have to have access. It's great for people to run around, and I'm not criticizing advocacy groups who talk about suicide awareness. But okay, then after awareness, is there treatment? Adequate treatment? Do people have access like we have for physiotherapy, 10 or 8 sessions? Or can you go in? Is there a mechanism? Or do you have to have a benefit? Is it easy to get mental health care without saying you have Blue Cross or you have...
Right.
You know what I mean? I often subscribe to the fact that it should be like Medicare. If you go in for Medicare and you have a broken bone, I hate using that comparison, but at the hospital, they don't ask you your Blue Cross number. Your bone is x-rayed at no cost. It's free in the healthcare system. So I think we have to almost get a parallel parity system for mental health. And this notion about, oh, we're understaffed, I don't buy that for a minute. I spent,
Really?
as I say, 42 and a half years in the formal system, Gary, as you know, here in New Brunswick. And I think we have plenty of staff. It's how we use our staff. And, throwing money at it with the same outcome is not the solution. You got to be creative of how do we access, what do we have access? We have that 988 now, the suicide helpline nationally, and we can't give up on it. I mean, there's so many families in Canada. We have a suicide every 142 minutes in Canada. So we're talking about 4,500 people in Canada died last year, and at least 10 or 12 people are affected. So it's 1 in 10 almost in Canada. And those poor families are suffering because they have lost a loved one, and the stigma associated with a funeral, the compromised rituals. You go out the street and you say, oh my God, oh, your brother suicided, and all that plays a factor in it. And I'm not getting off the topic because it's getting at the long outstanding, like, what's the impact of poor mental health? But that is the fail aspect. If you don't get your what's the worst case scenario of heart disease? It's death. So if you look at it from a continuum, you want to make sure your mental health and well-being is well addressed, and it's not only functional, but it's tested and it's field tested. And I do many, like this weekend, I'm doing with one of the fitness clubs here in New Brunswick, one on thriving on stress. And I did 4 or 5 webinars for dealing with stress with a tool that you can evaluate what's your stress quotient, what can you do about it, and then the follow-up without, trying to build a practice or anything is, okay, let's get, a life skills coach or an approach, if you want, to what are we going to do about it once it's out. So Eddie, you were saying you and your wife, if you were to do an assessment, a self-assessment of your stress level, then you would see where are the sort of the areas in your life that need to be changed. What are you going to do about it? If weight loss, I'm not inferring weight loss is an issue. I would far think your hockey teams and choices would cause more stress than weight loss. But bottom line is, what are you doing about it?
Yeah. Well, thanks. And that's so you're right. And you're so right, Greg.
Controlling the controllables. Control the controllables.
One final question for me, Greg, if I may. If you had his ear, what would you tell Prime Minister Carney to do to help Canadians out with mental distress? What would you tell Prime Minister Carney if you had his ear?
Well, it's funny that you should say that, because while he was running for the leadership, he secretively, no pun intended, came down to talk to Wayne Long. And I understand that he and Wayne Long attended our church on Sunday morning about 2 months ago. I go on Saturday night, so I missed them. But I would say to him, and I would say to the cabinet, that whenever you develop a policy, look at whatever policy you're doing with a mental health lens. When you look at it from that perspective, because we know in the province of New Brunswick, 32% of our province is in the realm of disabled. So what would that be in Canada? You have literally a third of the population that are not, and I'm not talking widows and people on fixed income, I'm saying the disabled population. So it's very important, with all the minutiae around about economic, what's the impact of whatever we're doing, homelessness, housing, whatever, what's the impact on the mental health and the mental well-being, including those suffering from major mental disorders.
Okay, thank you.
Now, Greg, before you go, I flashed a couple of comments on the screen while you were responding to our questions, and I thought I'd just flash them up again. So if you had any comments that you could.
Sure.
Okay.
I don't see them.
Okay.
Oh,
So,
Greg, your information. I have lost my mother. Oh, I'm very sorry about that, Angie. My deepest condolences. My deepest condolences. And Angie, I would say to you very clearly that it's very brave for you to say that. And don't ever feel that you have to pull up your bootstraps and get on with life. Suicide and grief by suicide is what we refer to, particularly after 2 or 3 years, complicated grief. And it's very, very important to get a sound understanding of what is the grief journey. And there's groups all across Canada that deal with grief. Hope and Healing is a program that is quite common. And get yourself to a grief group to talk about what is the pattern of dealing with grief and suicide so you can deal with the grief associated with suicide. But thank you very much for that. That's very brave of you. Ivanka? Ivanka. Yes, bang on. Both husband and wife disabled, they need support. Joe, you're bang on, and that's why I say it's very important to try to sift through the minutia and take control of the things in your life that you can control.
yeah, and just for anyone who may be just listening and not watching, Joe said, having come through the COVID pandemic, followed by increasing inflation across the board, it's no wonder people are stressed. Then, just when you thought things are easing, an orange threat is upon us. And he goes on to say, here we go. I understand the importance of a healthy diet, but unfortunately, a number of people can't afford the healthy alternative and succumb to junk food.
Absolutely true. And that is why many community groups, whether they be food banks or whatever, they have sharing clubs that help with the food purchasing and food purchasing and food food supply is very, very important. Whether it be church groups and things of that nature, it's very important.
And we have one more. Thank you, Greg, for sharing your thoughts on how family members cope with suicide. It's the first time I heard that side of it. The truth is, there are so many levels of guilt, shame, and pain. Thanks.
No question, Diane. Bang on. You couldn't have said it any better. And the thing is, I have been after funeral directors galore all the time that make sure, and maybe not at a funeral because there's so much going on, you're so wrapped up in getting through, you tend to think, oh, I have to pull up my bootstraps for mom or whatever. I put my grief on hold for my dad because he was a chip off. I was a chip off his block, the old block. He was much quieter than I and very reserved, and he was a man of integrity. But I put my grief for my dad on hold, and it was 10 years after I was at a funeral, and I was crying like nobody's business. Someone said, "Did you know that person that well?" And I said, "No." As the casket was rolling into the church, I was thinking of my dad and the fact that I had to support my mom, who was a widow. I put it on as a professional. I put my grief on hold, and I never grieved the loss of my dad, who died tragically with a massive heart attack in 1977. And I went 10 years. So people that have lost a loved one through suicide, beyond the guilt and the shame and the ability or inability talk about it, they have all that time in between. So I would say in the province of New Brunswick, for example, we know 1 in 10 are affected by suicide. And when you think a family of 3 or 4, add that, there's well over 10 to 15,000 people that are impacted by suicide. And every province should have a program to help people through the grieving process, especially the suicide.
Angie says, thank you, Craig, for your support and response. It's definitely a process to understand.
Absolutely, Angie.
And Greg,
Not a
with
problem
that,
at all.
I think we'll wrap it up and allow you to go. Certainly want to thank you for sharing what you have with us today. And I guess really from a stress perspective, if I heard you correctly, a couple of things to consider: exercise, diet, and health.
And
Did I
sleep.
miss anything? And sleep. Okay.
Sleep is a big one because many people have sleep disorders and they don't even know it. And when I talk about sleep, I'm talking getting a sleep disorder from the family doctor to find out how much REM you're getting, light sleep, heavy sleep if you want, all the layers of sleep you have to have for the body to recover.
Right. Okay. Now, certainly we're going to be discussing the healthcare system in general, probably more often than not, probably more often than what we want to, but there, we're at a crossroads as far as healthcare in this country is concerned. So definitely we'll have you back because you do have a different perspective on it than would we, and from a specific area in as well as in general. So definitely we'll have you back, Greg. I really want to thank you again for coming on with us. And again, anyone in New Brunswick, if you want to reach out to Greg, he's not hard to find. You have a profile on Facebook for Gregory DZ and Associates, I believe.
Gregory DZ.
Yeah.
Do it, or you can just Google my name, Gregory Z. Anywhere actually, doesn't have to be in New Brunswick because everything's technical. You can Zoom anywhere.
This is true.
So bottom line, I did a webinar for the Canadian Barrister Society on the impact of COVID on stress, for example. So sure, I'm available. And to your point, I know we're probably running out of time. I want to take just a second to say how honored and privileged I feel to be invited. And I love giving back because I think from birth and right through childhood and whatever, I've been blessed with a beautiful career, a lovely wife, and a lovely family. And anything I can do to the Canadian constituents, if you want, I'm all ears. And I'm not a know-it-all, but I can give you my sense of what I think we need to do collectively and collaboratively as a community and as a country. So thank you very much.
Thank
It's
you.
an honor and a privilege to be with you guys.
All right. Thanks, Greg. And we will talk again soon for sure.
Not a problem. Anytime.
Right. Good night.
Thank you, Greg.
Good night.
Well, Eddie, the time has come.
Yeah.
Your NHL playoff pulse update in a moment. If you are enjoying our stream and want to show your support, well, you can buy us a coffee. Simply click on the link below, and Eddie and I will enjoy the coffee. And thank you again for your support. So let's move along because now it's live from 4 floors up. Eddie is here with his playoff pulse update. Eddie?
Thank you very much, Gary, for that intro. Segment 4 of our show tonight, it's titled NHL Playoff Pulse, an Escape or an Identity. So I welcome all our viewers to comment away And the audience question we have for you while I go on and tell you the lowdown of the existing NHL playoffs, here's the audience question for you. Has playoff hockey helped lift your spirits lately, or is the pressure of the playoffs just adding to your tension? Do you think sports serves as both a distraction and unifier in times of national distress? Give us your thoughts. We'd love to put them up on the screen and talk about them. So let me carry on here. And I'll just start it off by saying, and then we're for. So as you guys know, after my beloved Canadians were basically sent packing to the golf course after the first round, and by the way, the Professional Women's Hockey League, the Montreal Victoire, the gals lost gallantly and have actually joined them on the golf course. So we've got both Montreal professional hockey teams playing golf right now. But by the same token, I was very, very hopeful that no other Canadian teams would join them soon thereafter. And as I mentioned last week, I was hopeful that 3 Canadian teams would actually head to the conference finals. I mentioned Toronto, Winnipeg, and Edmonton were all in a position to be in the Final Four. Well. Last Sunday, I looked out of my window here in the apartment, which faces west, and I saw this huge puff of smoke, billow of smoke just coming up. And, I'm just trying to figure out where that smoke was coming from. And you know what it was, Gary?
No, I couldn't imagine what it
was.
was.
A big pile of Maple Leafs burning. They played Game 7, and they did not even show up. Boy, did they get creamed 6-1. It wasn't even close. You know what? We can all make fun of that. We can all, go into the pity party and what went wrong. But, I mean, that is just no way to play a Game 7. I think it's 7 consecutive Game 7s they played in that they've lost. They lost 6-1. And you know what was even worse? A few of the fans continued to throw their $250 jerseys on the ice, which is absolute insanity. And by the way, now that the Toronto Maple Leafs are going to be joining the Montreal Victoire and Montreal Canadiens on the golf course, so are the Toronto Scepters from the Professional Women's Hockey League. They also lost and did not make it into the final playoff cut. So you know what? Look, all kidding aside, I was really rooting for the Toronto Maple Leafs to actually make it past the second round and go into the third, if just for the sake of having a greater Canadian contingent in the Final Four. But that just wasn't just to be. I really was rooting for them, but a disappointing season for them again. And you know what? Are they going into another rebuild? I don't know, Gary, because you said they've been rebuilding since 1967, right?
Yeah, and still are. And did I not say last week that they were going to blow this game? And did I not say that most of them had their clothes with them and their golf clubs, and they were getting off the plane? They never showed up at the rink, for God's sakes.
Yeah, that last game, they just lost really, really, really badly. But you know what? Good luck to them next year. They're rebuilding again. There's going to be a lot of changes again. Part of their core, mostly the core 4 just did not show for the last 4 games. And one of them or 2 of them are actually up for contract renewal. So I doubt very much they'll be offered contracts again. Plus the president of the Toronto Maple Leafs, Shanahan, his contract is up too. So I think there's going to be wholesale changes anywhere in that organization. Not just a clean slate, wipe the slate clean and start from scratch, but I'm sure there are going to be fundamental changes in that organization. And by the way, playing in Toronto as a professional athlete or not, being paid millions or not, that is one pressure cooker to play in, because you sneeze the wrong way, the media is all over you. So it's not a good working environment, but hey, it's professional sports, right? And you know what? With every sad story in professional sports, humanity starts to prevail. The Winnipeg Jets were playing Game 6, and yes, the Winnipeg Jets lost as well, Game 6, 4-2 against Dallas. The story of Mark Scheifele, longtime Winnipeg Jet, while he was in Dallas getting ready for his game on Saturday with Winnipeg, he got the news in the morning that his dad had unexpectedly passed away in Winnipeg.
Wow.
So you would immediately think he'd pack his bags and go home. No, he found the energy and the strength to persevere, and played the game. I know his dad was with him, on the ice, on his shoulders, overlooking his shoulders, on the bench, that his dad was there. He persevered and he played. I'm sure in the name of his father and in the name of everything that his dad sacrificed to get him to that level of professional hockey. So it was a real story of humanity, a real story of camaraderie, where he did hit the ice. The media was conveying their condolences and prayers and whatnot. He scored Winnipeg's first goal, and Dallas tied the game, and they went into overtime at 1-1. Just before the end of the third period, Mark Scheifele took a penalty. I mean, decided to take a penalty, or it might have been a possible goal. And unfortunately, Dallas scored very near the beginning of the overtime period, with poor Mark Scheifele in the penalty box. And pan cameras, he did not leave the box. He was just sitting there all by himself. I mean, of course, his father is on his mind, and now he's in the penalty box while the other team scored. The captain of the Winnipeg Jets came over and got him out of the penalty box, gave him a big hug. The rest of the teammates came and gave him a big hug. And then one of the biggest wonderful traditions in professional sports, and the only sport that does it, is the handshake at the end of a series by the hockey players. And each and every Dallas Star shook his hand, gave him a hug, and offered him words. That handshake line took a long time. It just shows you about the spirit of, it just shows you about the strength of the human spirit at the worst of times, that people can actually talk to each other and console each other in difficult times. So that was a big story for the Winnipeg Jets. And unfortunately, the President's Cup champions, meaning the team that finished first in the NHL regular season, got bounced in the second round. So I'm hoping it's a learning exercise and for the team, and they'll be better for it next year. But what a story with Mark Scheifele. Just I had tears in my eyes when I watched that. So next question is, what's left, right?
Yep.
Well, the Edmonton Oilers, again, as I predicted at the beginning, at episode 4, Gary, I predicted that Edmonton and the Dallas Stars would be in the Final Four. Guess what? They're 2 of the Final Four. So it's a repeat of last year's Western Conference Final. Last year, Edmonton took it 4-2. And it's the third year in a row now that Dallas makes it to the conference finals. So it'll be interesting to see whether or not our last remaining Canadian team, the Edmonton Oilers, actually prevail and advance into the Stanley Cup. For the Eastern Conference Final, we have the reigning champions Florida Panthers playing the Carolina Hurricanes. And last year, Florida advanced over New York Rangers. They didn't make the playoffs this year. And Carolina lost to the New York Rangers 4-2 in last year's round. So it'll be very interesting to see how that works out. And by the way, Florida Panthers won their first game against the Carolina Hurricanes, and our Canadian Edmonton Oilers will be playing the Dallas Stars tonight. So that's what I got in terms of the National Hockey League, Gary. Good luck to the gals that are playing in the Professional Women's Hockey League. I believe the team from Ottawa and the team from Minnesota are playing in the final round, if I'm not mistaken. So good luck for them. Good for sports all around. I personally have found watching the playoffs not a stressor, but I personally found them to be a stress release. A solid sense of nationalism, regardless of what Canadian team is in the picture, in the NHL playoffs. So for me, it's a stress release, and it's good to get behind your team. Hockey being Canada's national sport or preferred national sport. It's always great to chat with your friends. I continuously jab you about the Toronto Maple Leafs, Gary. So that's a de-stressor for me. I find sports will take a lot of people's minds off of the difficulties of life, as Greg had mentioned before, right? What are we doing in terms of recreation? And it'd be great to hear from the rest of our guests, our viewers. And what do you think? Is hockey a de-stressor, or does it actually increase your stress levels? And oh, by the way, also good luck to our team from Canada that's playing in Sweden right now in the International Ice Hockey Federation World Championship. So I believe Canada has made it into the elimination round. And that's another thing for Canadians to rally around on top of the Stanley Cup Championships.
Wow, that was a busy report.
Thank you.
And Joe says it might be a repeat of last year, Florida versus Edmonton in the final.
Yeah, I think he's right.
Before we go, we did have a few people very early on saying hello, popping in and saying hello in the comments. And I didn't get a chance to get those popped up on screen, but thank you for doing that. There's one last one that just came in. Well, it came in a few minutes ago, but I thought I'd wait until you were finished your report. Totally. Eddie, I'm so grateful to you and the fact that we have multiple televisions in the house. You distress by going to watch sports and not making me have to watch it. Thank you, my love.
Oh, good one. I didn't see that one.
Well, it came in a short time ago, and I thought I'd save it right till the very end. That's a nice way to sum it up overall. All right, and it's time to call it a night, and what a night. We have covered headlines, hardships, and hockey. Thank you for joining us. Remember, your voice matters more than ever. So keep the conversation going in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Night Talk returns in 7 days. I'm Gary MacDonald. Good night. Good night, Eddie.
Good night, everybody.